The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 39. Creepy Crawly. On the morning of my 19th birthday, I filled out an application form for a position as a summer stewardess for a charter airline based at Gatwick Airport. Dan Eyre invited me to attend an interview a week later. The meat market full of girls attending the recruitment drive all wanted what I wanted, a foot in the door, and we all gushed and were as charming as we could manufacture. The interview went well, and I was pretty confident that I would get the job. But 10 days later, when the letter arrived in the post confirming that I actually had, the elation I felt was so foreign to me that I had to walk the streets of Brighton for miles just to release all the pent-up energy. I walked back to all my old haunts, places of pain and growth. I walked through the alleyways of the lanes and through Kemp Town down to the marina. I was pretty certain that day that I was the happiest I had ever been, and I raked through the memories of my life just to make sure. Yes, I was. I had never been happier. I decided to thank Auntie Joan's God just in case he'd had a hand in any of it. "You're welcome," were the words that appeared in my mind as a subtle but perceptible voice. I shook my head and stopped to meet my reflection in a shop window. I looked normal, but my mind was not. Perhaps I'd overdone it. I knew I had sustained a dramatic shift in mood from my normal mental state because of this good news. I was manic and hyped and overloaded with good feelings, as if I was in some sort of countdown for total bliss. I made my way home singing Level 42's Something About You in my head, but my focus was choppy and I kept forgetting to make the correct turns. What should have been an hour's walk took 3. I almost ran to work the following day. When I handed in my notice, I felt triumphant, and surges in my emotional state continued. Everyone at the press was genuinely upset that I would be leaving. I enjoyed the feeling of being wanted. I promised I would keep in touch with those I had become close to. Too many relationships had come and gone in my life for me to walk away with just a shrug. The training course at Dan Eyre lasted a month, and I enjoyed the new experience, even though learning the safety and emergency procedures would have been less taxing had I have known how to study. I was overwhelmed by the amount of information that I would be required to assimilate and then regurgitate whenever I checked in for a flight. I failed my first test, and I was the only girl in my class to do so. This was embarrassing and humiliating. I was allowed to take the test again and I passed, but the experience sobered me. I had thought being a stewardess meant standing at the jetway looking pretty and smiling and doling out meals and drinks. But it also meant knowing the ins and outs of a safety procedure manual, a 2,000-page brick of data that was about as interesting as one. It was during the training course that I met a couple of girls looking for a third roommate to share a house they had rented in Crawley, which was only a few miles' drive from the airport. I was thrilled, and just like the Laker ladies, I was happy that I would soon be living with my own kind. When I told my brother that I was going to move out the following weekend, he understood. We had lived together for the past 2 years, and we both thought that our quarrelling would likely diminish if we parted ways. My brother had recently been hired at a local supermarket to work in their fish bar and could gut and fillet a mackerel as instinctively as the fisherman who caught it. He was very good with knives, and I was very impressed. Like me, my brother was also about to become roommates with relative strangers, a married couple, co-workers who had a mortgage to pay and needed help with it. I bought my first car that week, a barely functioning white Mini Cooper. After jump-starting it, I drove to Crawley with my possessions in the boot. There were holes in the floor which I had to cover with a rubber mat, but still, if it was raining, water came up through the floorboards every time I braked. I couldn't have cared less, though. I was driving into the future, which I had already seen, and everything felt so right. Sharing a house with 2 other girls was easygoing enough, although when I left some dirty dishes in the sink, their disapproval was obvious. I was not as tidy as they were, but learned to be. I adjusted quickly to their personalities and their whims, because I knew from past experience that this was the easiest way to get along with strangers. Working as a summer stewardess for Dan Air was a painful experience, however. My self-control and resilience was put to the test by the older stewardesses, who resented the younger girls, but were too gutless to realise that it was their own lives they resented. I wanted to tell Sandy D to fuck off, and I wanted to tell Jackie W to join her. I didn't, though. I was used as whipping boy by the older ladies who had missed out on marriage and missed out on children. Unlike me, many of the other temps had learned to rein in their bubbly personalities, and if I'd have done the same thing, I would have not have been such an obvious target. To be bubbly and attractive was a real block to harmony in that environment. I was written up for the pettiest infractions and constantly being tested by the check stewardesses who liked to ask the most obscure questions regarding the evacuation or the fire procedures. To catch the younger girls out was the name of their game. If you forgot the battery duration of a DME torch or how many litres of whatever was in the fire extinguisher, you would be publicly shamed. This happened to all the temps at one time or another, but for me, more frequently. I was confident that I could put a fire out, and I was confident that I could minister CPR, and I knew what to do if we ditched in the Mediterranean. Not that there had ever been a successful ditching that I knew of. But dealing with the bitchy egos of these bitchy women took every ounce of energy I had to spare, and there wasn't much. We visited countless European countries, but seldom got off the plane. We just sat on the ground trying to nap before reboarding sunburnt passengers who were not in the same mood as they had likely been on the outbound flight. The work was tiring and ageing due to the dehydration and the constant changes in cabin pressure. We swelled up and we swelled down. Apparently, we stewardesses aged on the inside as well as the outsides at unprecedented rates, and most of us looked 3 months pregnant by the time we'd lugged ourselves off the plane. I vowed that I would smother my face and body with moisturiser until the day I died. I drank water like a camel and prayed to Auntie Joan's God that, if ever I ended up like Sandra D, I might die peacefully at the wheel of my Mini Cooper. Those stewardesses who had been able to find a husband, occasionally an overweight divorced pilot with kids, but more often than not a loader or a baggage handler, often had problems conceiving. To be an ageing stewardess was a fate worse than death. I wanted to look like a Laker lady, not a prune, and I wanted to travel the world, not hop around Europe in cramped planes that resembled a sardine can. My plan was simple. I would work the summer, and then the following summer, if I was asked back, which I miraculously was, I would be 21 and old enough to apply to British Airways, the elite of the elite, the creme de la creme. I would worry about my insides later. That same year, I lost my virginity at age 19 to a hunky Muslim man nicknamed Rocky, who was a friend of our Armenian landlord and a year older than I. I don't know why, but I had always expected my first intimate experience to be awkward and painful. It was not, quite the contrary. My boyfriend was born in Shiraz, Iran, to a wealthy family who sent him and his 2 brothers to England in 1979 when war was declared with Iraq. If his parents had not had the money or the connections, he would have been forced to enlist and fight and die like a lot of other boys the Ayatollah Khomeini used to enforce his ideology. Rocky and his 2 brothers had been sent to a boarding school in Kent and raised themselves in the same way any child without parents would have. Rocky was only able to talk to his parents once in a while, and the phone connection was terrible and the conversations were as superficial as one would expect. After the Shah was deposed, exit visas were not easy to come by, and Rocky and his brothers did not know if they would ever see their parents again. Rocky had not seen his mum or dad since the age of 13, which upset me a lot. I had not seen much of my mum since the age of 13 either, and she only lived 80 miles away. This upset me a lot too. After dating Rocky for the summer, I moved in with him and his 2 brothers into a house they rented in the area of Crawley called Bewbush. Creepy Crawley, as many called it, was an urban sprawl of indistinguishable housing built for airport employees. It was nothing like stylish Brighton I was used to, but living near the airport had its pluses. Rocky was a bouncer at a local nightclub, and he liked to buy and sell second-hand cars and cultivate dreams of making millions. He also enjoyed amateur boxing. He won some fights but lost more, and I would watch in horror as his nose bled and then his ego. As a means of preserving both, he retired in order to focus on what really mattered, being carefree and ambitious and flashy. When Dan Eyre asked me back to work the following summer, I suspected my second year wouldn't be any better than the first, but this time around I vowed to keep a lower profile. I would say yes to every demand, no matter how unreasonable. I would flatter the older girls, keep my highlights fresh, and I would not fall asleep on landing. Rocky and I were happy for over a year, like youngsters who believe they are in love are happy. We were both cocky, with little success in life to justify it, and we were both immature. After living like a married couple for that year, however, my boyfriend told me that it was best we take a break. In truth, he was looking at all the fresh young meat that frequented Da Vinci's nightclub in nearby Hawley, and they were looking at him with his Omar Sharif grin and his bulging biceps. Rejection was something I was overly familiar with, but something I was not able to process rationally. I thought my heart was broken, or more like irretrievably shattered. I had fantasized that we might marry and have a family and never divorce. I decided to move back to Brighton. The decision was quick and I wanted the move to be quick too. My brother came to pick me up. He didn't say much and didn't expect much. He just helped me stuff all my belongings in the back of his Morris Marina. We were halfway to Brighton when I asked him to turn back. I needed to see Rocky. I needed to see that he was as upset as I. My brother turned the car around without complaint, and with the engine running, he waited outside for me. When I walked back into the house, Rocky was sitting on the floor in front of the TV, eating a plate of fried chicken and rice, and was laughing at Bugs Bunny. I had been crying so hard and for so long that my face was blotchy and puffy, and I wanted to see whether his looked the same way. But it was just another day for Rocky. "Hey babe," he said without turning the TV down. The fact that he hadn't bothered to mute it really bothered me. My brother and I had rented a small terrace house on the east side of Brighton. In a few months I would be 21 and old enough to apply to British Airways. I had already filled out my application form and had stuffed it between the pages of my grandfather's atlas to keep it pristine. In the interim, I started working at a thriving pub on the Hove seafront called the Brunswick Arms. I loved the work and was good at it. My mental arithmetic was speedy, and I was able to handle several customers at once, pulling pints and flipping off bottle caps while threading cherries onto sticks and chatting with the locals. This was where I met a regular, a married but separated man 11 years my senior. Rob and I quickly entered into a relationship that would quickly reveal to me how disgusting life could get. Rocky came to visit me precisely 2 months after Bugs Bunny had so captured his attention. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I've made a terrible mistake. I love you. No one matches up to you. I want you back. I love you. Please, I've been such an idiot. Let's get married." Part of me was thrilled, and the other part of me thought, too little too late, mate. When I told Rocky that I had met someone new, he started to cry. I hated seeing him cry. Tears and muscles don't mix. I still loved Rocky, but he had casually disposed of me, and now I would punish him. He should have muted the fucking TV. If I had not been so punitive, life might have taken a different turn, but a new man had entered my life, and I wanted my ex to experience what broken-hearted felt like. I don't know why I moved in with Rob, a man I neither respected nor really cared about. Perhaps it was the fact that he drove a fast car, and had recently bought a penthouse apartment overlooking the ocean and needed some arm candy. I was prepared to be his candy because the hollowness of the arrangement was not obvious to my needy and bratty spirit. I was on the rebound and so was he. I was using him and he was using me. But he was more truthful with himself about that than I was with myself. My brother and I had only been living together for a couple of months when I told him I was thinking about moving in with Rob. He didn't seem to mind. He was used to things changing. My brother told me he was considering buying a place of his own anyway. It was then, off the top of my head, that I offered my brother the use of the spare room in my boyfriend's new place, rent-free, so he could save up enough money for a down payment. My brother did not care for my new boyfriend, no one did, but he saw an opportunity to advance and took advantage of it. My brother needs a spare room for a while, and I told him he could have it, I declared that evening. I knew Rob had been drinking all day, and when he had agreed with a so be it shrug, I doubted he would remember the following morning. Still, a deal was a deal, drunk or not, and although Rob was okay-ish with this arrangement, I was fine with it. And had Rob not have complied, I would have found a way to lodge some sort of ugly protest. By this time, Rob was beginning to understand that I had a very strong will. I didn't know whether my will was strong or not, because I still knew nothing about myself, which was ironic in a way because I knew a lot about other people and what motivated and upset them, but my attention was still turned outward. The moments of splendid internal clarity that had been happening to me since I was young still sometimes caught me pleasantly off guard, but I did not know why my mind would unexpectedly shift in this way. It was as if I was still a child in the body of a 5'9" green-eyed blonde. I knew nothing about what fueled me, what drove me, or what harmed